If you want to know how to make aviation flying videos, today I'm going to show you how, from start to finish. People ask me all the time how I make my flying videos. So today I thought I'd show you the whole process, from cameras to mounts to editing workflows, the software, the whole thing. Let's start with cameras. Before each flight, I decide the nature of the flight and pick the appropriate cameras and locations accordingly. Sometimes that means 3 cameras, sometimes more. On some really special flights, I have used up to 6 cameras. But the more cameras you use, the more time-consuming the editing gets. I have found that 3 cameras is the sweet spot, and that works really well for me, with 1 camera on the outside and 2 on the inside. As far as which camera to use, there are many cameras you can use to record your videos. Over the years, I have tried more than a dozen of them. Here's what I've learned and the cameras that I personally use. The first camera is the Garmin Verb, and I have a love-hate relationship with this camera. First, I love it because it is my only camera that can talk via Bluetooth to my Garmin audio panel, which makes editing really easy because there's no separate audio that needs to be synced up. In addition, it can even be controlled from inside the Garmin Pilot app, which is quite handy. But I hate this camera because it is my most unreliable camera. It overheats very easily and occasionally even chews up SD cards. Unfortunately, Garmin has discontinued this camera, so it's only available on the used market, but I still use it as a selfie view in the cockpit, which you can see here. The next camera is the GoPro Max, which is my favorite camera because of its versatility. It can be used as a regular action camera or as a 360 camera. I tend to use this camera on my wingtip on the outside to capture some really cool exterior views, like this one of the Statue of Liberty and the New York City skyline. I also use this camera inside the cockpit as a secondary selfie view, which in 360 mode can be easily edited to show panning views like this one on takeoff. The next camera I use is my newest. This is the GoPro Hero 11 Mini. Now, I have used every model of GoPro since the Hero 3, and each generation has definitely gotten better. This one is convenient because it's very small and has great image stabilization. I usually use this one on a suction cup as a selfie view or pointing out the window in the direction of some point of interest. The only downside to this camera is that it has no screen on the back, and so you need to use the app to ensure you have the positioning correct on the suction cup. The GoPro Hero 7 Black is the oldest GoPro I use because this is the cheapest GoPro model that has really good image stabilization, good enough to even work in the cockpit. I don't recommend using anything older than the 7 because the quality of the video is just simply not good enough for my aviation use case. The last camera I use is the GoPro Hero 8, which is the first GoPro model that had the mounting legs directly built into the camera, so you don't need to have a frame or a waterproof case or anything. The picture quality on the 8 is better than the Hero 7. However, the zoom capability on the Hero 7 is actually better than the Hero 8. I typically use this camera on a suction cup in random locations inside the cockpit. Now let's go to the plane and talk about the mounts. I'll show you exactly where I put them and how I mount them. All right, let's start with the exterior. On any given flight, I usually have 1 exterior camera mounted. And on my plane, there are 3 good spots to mount them. On the tail, I can use one of these My Pilot Pro mounts, and this mount can be used to the rear tie-down port, or it can also be used on the tie-down port under the wing. Those are okay, and they work well. The mount is solid. This thing is not going to come off in flight. But my favorite exterior angle is using this one as a wing cam. This is a FlightFlix camera, a FlightFlix mount, And this one is also rock solid. I swear this one is so solid, the wing's gonna come off the plane before the mount comes off the wing. But some people use suction cup mounts on the outside. I don't think that's safe. I think that is just too risky. I want mounts on the outside that are really tied down and attached physically. So that's my point of view on exterior. Now let's go interior. Okay, now inside the plane, there's a bunch of different setups I use. First, this right here, I have this plugged into the oxygen port. This is a really cool mount that allows me to capture a good view of the panels all the time. So especially in instrument conditions, it's nice to have a recording of everything that's happening on the screens and in the avionics. So that's what this camera is for. The next camera is up front. Here I have two different cameras. The first is another GoPro Max that I use in 360 mode here. And this one is the Garmin Verb, which I use as kind of a cockpit selfie view with the audio being captured all the time. In addition to that, I also use a suction cup mount for either the GoPro Hero 8 or the Hero 7. And I just put this in random places around the cockpit, depending on what I'm trying to capture. As far as suction cups, there's a whole bunch of different types of suction cup mounts. The one I use is a RAM mount. This one is really, really good, high quality, and you can buy it in all kinds of various configurations with different accessories and everything. I just use it with a simple ball connector with a GoPro adapter at the end. So that's what's happening with cameras. Now, the audio is the other thing that we should talk about. Recording cockpit audio is always challenging. It has been something I struggled with for the first couple of years experimenting with this stuff. So what I've concluded is that you should always have a digital audio recorder capturing the underlying audio for the entire flight. Cameras, even the Garmin Verb, batteries die, SD cards get filled up, sometimes cameras overheat. None of the cameras can be truly relied on for audio. This digital audio recorder is extremely simple. It doesn't create huge audio files from it. You can record an entire flight on this with no problem in terms of battery or storage capacity. So the way I plug this in is I use the actual microphone input using a cable, a really cool cable from Sporties that looks like this, and it has a couple of different ends on it. You got to be sure to use the end that has the two black stripes on it. That's what will allow you to get stereo recording in your audio files. The other end of that cable just plugs into the headphone jack. I put it into the back seat jack, but it's got a little splitter in it, so if you're in a two-seat airplane, you could use that in the passenger port as well. So that's it. That's everything that's happening on the interior. Now, after a flight, we've just come back from a flight that's maybe an hour long. We're going to have a ton of video, raw content from all of these different cameras. And in order to use it effectively, you've got to have a very systematic, predictable, organized way to process all of these files. So let's go into my office and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so we're in my office now, and here's the way I typically do it. First of all, these cameras have tons and tons of data. So what I use is a MacBook Pro with a 1 terabyte solid state drive. I download all of the raw footage into a very specific folder structure, which you can see on the screen over here. That folder structure, I have it as just a template in my Finder, and I copy it into a new folder for every flight. And each camera, once I download it, it's on the computer and is syncing into my Dropbox. Because of the sheer volume of data, I can only keep one flight locally on my computer at a time. And then once I'm done processing it and editing it and playing with it, then I let it go online only into Dropbox, and then all of my archives are there. So Dropbox does have unlimited accounts, and so that is probably the easiest way to go. I have 30 or 40 terabytes worth of flight video raw content stored up in Dropbox. So figure out what works for you. It doesn't have to be Dropbox, but you will need either some cloud service or a really large external hard drive. Okay, so as I do it, I literally take the cards out of each one. I put it into this card reader. I use a Safarel card reader. This is a pretty useful gadget. It has the ability to read any kind of card, whether it's a micro SD or a big SD or literally anything. That's kind of how I do it. And now, once the raw footage is on the computer, now we'll talk about the next step in terms of software. Now, everything I've talked about so far has been somewhat mechanical, but when you start getting into the software, now we're getting into the artistic part. There are not really any agreed upon norms of how to do this. There's a bunch of different software products out there. There are three major ones that I'm aware of that most people are using. Either Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, or the one that I use, which is Final Cut Pro. And Final Cut Pro is a really powerful software. It does a lot of cool things, and I feel like I've just scratched the surface with what I can do in terms of video editing techniques in Final Cut Pro. So hopefully, as you see more of my videos, you'll see an improvement over time of the quality of the finished product, but we'll see. For now, let's turn your attention to my screen and I'll show you how I make a video. Let's dive into Final Cut Pro. First thing as I do is I create a new library and I utilize that same folder structure that I showed you before. This folder structure really helps me stay organized. So what I'm going to do is create a library inside my Final Cut Pro directory. Now inside here, when you create a library in Final Cut Pro, it automatically creates an event for you with today's date. I change that to raw footage. And this is the place where I import all of my media. Then what I do is I create an additional event for the different projects. So maybe I have a YouTube video, and then maybe I have, not a library, an event. Another event for an Instagram reel. And I create different events. Inside each one, let's pretend this is a YouTube video, I will then create a project that is the main YouTube video. That project is inside this event. And if it's a short, I would do vertical. If it's a regular full form video, I would do 4K and then use the Apple ProRes 422 rendering. Now, once that happens, now that gives me a timeline down here. And so now you have to get a baseline for the whole flight. So what I do is I usually use the audio from the Cockpit voice recorder. I put that in here, and then I'll take that and I keep that in the timeline, okay? Then what I'll do is think about what's my next closest baseline. This happened to have been a short flight. It was a formation flight of 2, and we were flying for less than an hour. So in this case, I had the Garmin Verb camera running the whole time, so that's another good choice for a baseline. But usually your cameras come and go. Some of them are turned on and off throughout the flight, and the only real baseline that you have is the audio track. Once you have that, then you start thinking about where you want to import video. And let's say you want to take the beginning. You remembered you had a good intro in your Verb camera, so you might take that at the beginning. Then later, you might remember that you had a really good picture from the wing cam for the takeoff, so you might grab that and bring that one in. And notice what I'm doing is all really rough edits now. I'm not getting into fine details. I'm just constructing the overall storyline. So right now, this was a really short flight. This was the whole timeline is 30 minutes, which is very, very short. If it was a longer flight, this whole audio timeline that I'm using as a baseline would be maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, even 5 hours. Then it's all a matter of trimming it down after you get all of your different clips imported into here. So that's the basic mechanical part. Beyond this, the rest is truly art. It's the art of storytelling, it's the art of video editing, and there's tons and tons of different tricks that I use, from keyframes to speed ramps to transitions, lots of other cool little tricks that I've learned over the years. But this is the basics of it. I hope this is helpful for you. What I'd like you to recognize is that this is just an example of how I do it. It is not necessarily the right way. It is not necessarily the best way. It's simply the best way that I've come up with. So please, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for me, please put that in the comments below too.